Hi, Courtney.
Hi, Monica.
How's it
So
going?
today we were talking, Monica and I were talking about the idea of talking about meditation on this podcast, and we had mixed reactions, which I think is very normal. I also wanted to tell you I did my teacher training this weekend. I was leading a weekend where we talked about a whole bunch of different things, but there was a focus of meditation and mindfulness, and everybody had to do a meditation presentation, and then we had a lot of discussion about meditation. And one of the ones that really stood out was on the very first weekend, one of the women, we sat for 20 minutes, and one of the women afterwards came up to me and said, well, that was just one of the worst experiences of my life. Like she didn't pull any punches. She was like, that was really awful. I just became aware of everything that I think, and it was kind of distressing, and I didn't feel comfortable with that. And as you know, that's kind of the point of meditation, is sometimes to be uncomfortable and to recognize that, the world doesn't end when we're uncomfortable or when we sit still. Like that actually is, there's a lot of freedom in that. And then we had this weekend where we're doing all of these meditations, and we're sitting for 20 minutes, and then we're sitting for a little longer, and then we keep talking about all these different techniques. And at the end of it, she comes up, and she didn't even realize the irony of it, but she said to one of the guys who led her through meditation, she goes, I really liked your voice. I really like the technique that you were showing us. She goes, I just wish it was a little longer. I was like, wow, that was like just a couple weekends ago that you were saying that it was the worst experience of your life, and now you wish it were longer. And I just thought that there's something so interesting in that we were so resistant to sitting in silence, but very quickly we want more of it.
Okay. Um, I want to talk about a couple things here. One, I do want to say to people though, is that, meditation, like pranayam, like asana practice, is something that you have to allow students to have space to explore it at their own pace.
For
Uh,
sure.
I had a student who told me every time she sat down to meditate, she cried. And I said, well, at what point in the meditation do you start to cry? Like after how long? And she said, about 1 minute. And I said, well, how about if you meditate for 55 seconds? And so, I think, and I think it is frightening. I mean, I think that the resistance um, is the things we tell ourselves. And I will say that I think the more you've kind of dealt with issues, and the more positive I think you are about yourself, and the more healthy you are and loving and kind in general toward yourself, and I think we're all at different places in that, I think meditation becomes easier. Uh, and for me personally, um, I avoid meditation sometimes because those feelings do arise, and I think for people those feelings feel really, really big, and rather than sitting with them, we'll pretty much do anything possible to avoid sitting with them. But again, the paradox is that once you start the sitting, the feelings kind of release, and you realize that they weren't that big at all, that we make them bigger in our mind than what they really are when we give them space to sit with them. Um, but and then I get into that space once I get through the feelings. That's the space where I get into that kind of peaceful space. But I had my teacher training 3 weeks ago, and we also talked a lot about meditation. And I started them with the meditation of just, basically having their feelings, and then working through that, and then getting to the point where, you're in that space of, peacefulness. And then for me, the next exciting stage of that is usually I get a lot of innovative ideas start to come up. I actually meditate with a piece of paper and pen. But the thing I do want to say too is that I've noticed for myself, and this is something that my students have taught me, and really I've for the first time this last teacher training, I'm really starting to think about it, is that, you know, I'm at a different space from them as far as, you know, I've got a couple students who are like, well, I sit and I just automatically become peaceful. And so, you know, I would say to that, you know, maybe they're a little more self-aware, or a little more healthy in expressing their feelings in general life. And so I think, again, too, you know, I think meditation, you know, is going, the quality of our meditation, our ability to feel comfortable meditating, is going to kind of depend, I think, also on what our mind is telling us, and more importantly, the emotions that are, you know, circling inside of us, you know, or lack thereof.
I agree, but I know, you know, Pema Chodron. If I might be butchering her name. She's this woman who is a nun monk type in Buddhism. She used to be married, but after she divorced, this was the route she ended up going, and she's been very popular in the way that she can speak to people no matter where they're at within their journey, which I think for spiritual teachers can be hard to do, because I think sometimes the more esoteric that people get in these concepts, the harder it is to say, oh, how do you start when you've never done it before, when it seems like a terrifying thing. But she does have a quote that I really, really liked, where she said, the problem is that most people quit meditation just when it gets interesting. And she says, and by interesting, I don't mean pleasurable. So if we were just sitting down thinking like, I'm going to be peaceful, and you might even be peaceful in the beginning, but there's something about the fact that we all kind of hit these edges. There are points that come in and rise up, and it happens in all of us. It is a part of being human. There's stuff that is hanging on and waving through, and it isn't always pretty. And sometimes it's as simple as, you know, our leg falls asleep and that's just freaking uncomfortable and we want to move it. But for me, it's just been really powerful to recognize that I can feel in this way and it won't overcome me. It won't win. It won't be the end of me, and it doesn't define me. So that when big moments happen in my life, even if, for example, like I was on a plane, you know, and I sometimes get freaked out with plane rides, but there were techniques where I realized I was recognizing that me and the fear were not like one and the same. It was something that was there, but it wasn't necessarily something that was going to become me or that was going to swallow me whole, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit more about Pema Chodron, and this may be veering a little off the subject,
Sure.
and maybe intentionally. So, no, but the thing I think that interests me most, and I do love her, and I have read her stuff, and she defines herself interestingly. I think it's something like a warrior Buddhist, a warrior Buddhism. Yeah. So it's a little different. But I love her, and I encourage people to definitely pick up some of her stuff, because she is very, very human and very real, and she writes excellently, and she's really funny. But one of the things that, on a more serious note, that I love is she talks about the path kind of we take as yogis, as you know, as big Y yogis, and traditionally in Buddhism or some of the more spiritual beliefs, it's kind of like you're walking up the hill, and as the further you walk up, the more you're kind of shedding your, you know, attachments or whatever. But the further you walk up too, you're walking away from humanity in a lot of ways. You know, you're distancing yourself.
Yes, I agree.
The mountain, the steeper the mountain is, the less people obviously can, you know, be on that, just from a physical perspective. But the thing she talks about from her perspective, the way she practices Buddhism, is you are not walking up the mountain. You are actually walking down the mountain. And so you're walking into suffering and into compassion at the same time. So you're coming into the people, and you're living, you know, in a very full, compassionate, open way, you know, within our society, and staying connected. And I think, you know, that's the thing sometimes I struggle with in Buddhism is that, you know, it feels like the path is almost one, you're heading towards isolation in some ways and disconnection.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that quote, because I've heard it before, but it's always nice to hear something like that again. It is absolutely true that it feels like we're doing something so selfish in a way, and you're sitting on your own in a world that kind of needs more and more connection, not less and less. But the whole thing is to, again, fill your own cup, sort of thing. So because I think when you have dealt with your stuff, and with your hurts and the hurt you have caused and the hurt other people have caused you, and without always putting this huge dialogue and drama of he said, she said, within our mental fabric, I think then we get this opportunity to be more free and loving and kind, and be able to deal with our mother-in-laws at like Christmas dinner. Like it just becomes more of a thing that's able to happen.
And I think too, in line with that, and of course, I'm thinking as we're talking, and that's what I love about doing the podcast with you, Courtney, dearly, is that the thing is too, with meditation, and whether you're doing it sitting or just exploring the world the way you explore it, because I think obviously the big why, and for me, self-growth is incredibly important, and expansion and all those things. That's the driving force in my life in a lot of ways. But I found too is kind of the more I understand about myself and accept in myself, and I'm compassionate in myself, I can then take that compassion and love and self-acceptance into my students and into my friends and into the people around me, and allow them. I think for me, the goal often is just to allow people to see that we're all human, that
Mm-hmm.
and that and that for me, there is no, life is a journey, and there is no end. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
I think a lot of times
exactly.
people get into this mode of meditating, that you're meditating towards something. And the
Mm-hmm.
reality is, I think, we're in a lot of ways maybe meditating just to connect and commune, and really understand that we're all in this together. Um, so, and I mean, I do struggle with meditation, and I think we struggle with the things we probably need the most. But I also see
That's
great value in it.
That's true, though, what you said about it not being goal oriented. And that's, I think, even one of the hard things is that you can't, if you work out at the gym every day, you can promise yourself that you're going to see some results. Like you will. If you eat right and you exercise, you're probably going to see a difference in your body than if you didn't. And you will see some differences in meditation, but they're really a lot more subtle, and they're not as sexy, And then there are also times when you're sitting down and you're meditating and it feels like it's your really first time that you've ever done it, even when you have done it for years. And we want more than that. We are very goal oriented in most societies. That's kind of how we've been brought up. So it's a really challenging thing to say, like, what, like, no matter what happens, I'm still going to sit down, even if it's what I perceive to be as a bad meditation, even though, really that doesn't exist. There's no such thing as bad. But also I really like the idea that people also don't need to go down the same path. Like, meditation is such a big subject. It's so big, and there's so many avenues to get towards the same kind of awareness, and maybe there will be a fragment of peace left from that. But it's not going to be the same for everybody, because I have had some of my teachers that I've encountered, and there's been a little bit of dogma, or of, if you don't meditate for X minutes per day, then you're not going to get the benefits, and it's not useful. And I haven't found that to be true. I found, yes, there is an idealized point. And when I've had the opportunity to even meditate for like an hour a day on, retreats or something, I felt great. But it doesn't mean like that my life is going to fall to pieces just because I don't always make the time. I think sometimes having the space to say, 5 minutes is enough, or 0 minutes is enough, and I'm going to try to just walk with awareness, or cook with awareness, or do something within my very busy day, and that can be enough.
Yeah, yeah. I think that the whole concept of meditation, I think people too, it's the understanding, and I wanted to speak to kind of what you were saying about the exercise and diet and that kind of thing. And I think, I run, but I've also had a lot of injuries. And so, a lot of my, for me, there are different paths of meditation, not just different styles, but paths.
Yes.
So like Jnana tends to be the more intellectual path. And I think in a lot of ways, the running, that's kind of the meditative path I practice there, because when I'm running, I'm in my body saying, what are my glutes doing? My hamstrings are now starting to hurt. That means my glutes have gotten tired. But I'm completely in my body, knowing exactly what's going on in any given moment in time, reminding myself, looking at my breath. My breath is getting raggedy. What's tired? Do I need to slow down? Do I need to change my gait? Do I need to speed up? And, and I think, sometimes people don't understand. I think, that meditation is, it's obviously about teaching us to be present in the moment. But we do that in a lot of ways by ultimately letting go of that. And I think too, I think sometimes it's important, even if somebody doesn't quote unquote meditate by sitting, but to find some kind of activity where you can practice that space of just, really being in the moment and, really. And I think that's the thing is true. I mean, I think that the activities we love the most in life, we are in that meditative state. Those activities where time stands still. And, that's the thing I think we're ultimately trying to get to, is that place where we can do that all, as much of the time as possible, where when I'm cooking, I'm really into my vegetables and the oil and the meat and what's going on. And, when I'm talking to my partner, I'm looking in his eyes and I'm listening and actively listening and engaged and not trying to think of what am I going to say next. And, but for meditation, like the sitting, and I think that's kind of my Achilles heel right now, as far as just, that's the space that I struggle the most with in life, is expressing my emotions. And a lot of times it's expressing sadness and expressing anger. And I notice the meditation piece is a space for me where I actually sit and that stuff can kind of rise like cream to the top. And so, and I know that's my specific experience, but it's interesting to me. And so, and I think that's the thing, is you have to have value in what you do. And I think that's the most important part. And that's what I tell my students, whether it's an asana practice, pranayama practice, or a meditation practice. If you don't find value for it, you won't do it. And so the whole shoulding of it, don't should on yourself, because there have been times in my life, where things go by the wayside, different practices, and it's because you just are not, for whatever reason, you're not finding value in it.
Yes. And, sometimes we fall off of tracks that maybe would carry us better and more easily through a period of our lives. But even falling off of the track can be a great lesson to learn what is valuable. Even if let's say, you stop exercising for a while and just decide to, eat lots of cake, and it feels really good for a while. But then after a while you don't, and you want to find, a little less cake and a little more exercise. I wouldn't say no cake, because what kind of life is that? But I just think that meditation for some reason is seen as this all or nothing, all encompassing thing. And I think I gave the example of that woman just to kind of show that, sometimes the things that we resist can very quickly be gifts to us, be exactly the opposite of what we assume that they are. We assume that it's going to be something that's going to make us fall apart, when it can actually feel like something that's bringing us back together. But I agree with you that it can be a lot of different things besides sitting. And I just think as long as it has the quality of just doing one thing at one given time, because so few of us have the opportunity to just do one thing. And even, I'll make Christmas cookies while I'll be on the phone with somebody, and there might be Christmas music playing in the background. And these are all very festive, lovely things, but it is a lot. It really is. It ends up kind of cluttering you, and from time to time, just doing one of them at a time, which at first might even feel boring because we're so used to be inundated with our senses. But it can be really like a healing and lovely place where we can see where we're coming from. And, maybe underneath all of that festive joy is a little bit of holiday stress, for example, and we can become aware of it a little bit sooner.
I want to say too, very quickly, because it's interesting what you said, and this may be a whole nother podcast, but it's something, if people who have made it this far in the podcast, I think it's really important, and I think many people miss this. Boredom is an emotion. And boredom is an emotion that often hides other emotions. And so, that feeling, that's another thing I've come to terms with, is when I feel bored, there is something simmering underneath it that I am desperately trying to escape. And so, I think that's the other interesting part. The other thing is too, is that we think if we devote ourselves to one task, it's going to be boring. But if it's really something you genuinely are interested in, like baking, or enjoy listening to music, or, whatever it is, when we're really into it, I enjoy things much less when I'm not a big multitasker. I'm not at all, because I find I drop things, I break things. I do
yes, absolutely.
Things don't get done. I burn cookies, and so it's not. Then the activities are not. Then there's no activity that's enjoyable. Just citizen side. But the more important thing is the boredom, and I would encourage people, really, when you are experiencing boredom, to stop for a minute. I actually, and this is a trick with the meditation too, is I say, I'm just going to stop and I'm going to sit for 5 minutes and just kind of sit with myself and see see if there's something underneath the boredom. And then if I'm still bored, whatever I planned on doing, then I can go do it. But 99.99999% of the time, if I actually sit, I'm not bored after 5 minutes, because I've gotten through those emotions that I was attempting to hide through escaping, because boredom was saying escape, escape, escape.
Yeah. I know maybe that would be a really good New Year's resolution, though, like seek boredom, actually chase after it a little bit, instead of exactly the opposite, which is what most of our doing. We're cover up the silence or cover up what's uncomfortable. And make sure that we can fit in more. A new year happens and we think we can accomplish more, be more. What if we just look for a little bit more boredom and a little less of everything else? It would be very interesting.
I think that's brilliant. I think it's a great way to end the podcast, because we're heading towards a while. Yeah. But that's the thing, is I think that was absolutely brilliant. And I encourage people to seek boredom. That's beautiful. Yes. So if you get anything from this podcast, seek boredom.
That's wonderful. Happy holidays, everyone. We hope that you have will we be back the last week of December, and as always, we really would love to hear your input as to any topics that you might want us to speak about, or any questions that you might have.
And any constructive criticism too. We're all about constructive criticism, for sure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Cool. All right, baby. I will see you towards the end of December, and we'll see y'all. Cool. Bye, baby.
Bye.